Michelle Kremer, al ministro Isa, a todos los periodistas y a los invitados de nuestros visitantes. Les voy a hacer una propuesta antes de avanzar, que la primera parte le demos la oportunidad al señor Kremer de exponer cuáles son sus consideraciones, lo que le mereció el Premio Nobel de Economía 2019, y que en una segunda parte, como suele ocurrir aquí, después del almuerzo, que le demos la oportunidad al ministro Isa de exponer sus consideraciones sobre la economía dominicana, que yo sé que es del interés de todos ustedes. De todos modos, vamos a tratar de ponerle a nuestros visitantes cuál es el procedimiento habitual. A nuestro invitado, el señor Kremer, le damos la oportunidad de poner sus consideraciones y luego los periodistas hacen preguntas, y en una segunda parte los invitamos a almorzar y luego que recargan hacemos otra ronda de preguntas. Por alguna razón de tiempo ellos necesitan aprovechar que avancemos lo más que se pueda, así que vamos a tratar de hacer 2 periodos lo más acortado posible, de manera que a las 2 de la tarde, 2:15, hayamos concluido. Bienvenido. Señor Kremer, lo invito a que nos exponga sus consideraciones que le parezcan oportunas sobre la economía dominicana, qué lo trae al país, la economía internacional, cómo puede incidir en la economía dominicana, y desde luego cuáles son los fundamentos del Premio Nobel 2019. Bienvenido.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll speak in English, so apologies for that. Why don't I start with what you suggested, of saying a little bit about the approach for which Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and I received the Nobel Prize, and then I could maybe say a little bit, and Minister Contreras could say a bit about the work that we hope to do in the Dominican Republic on this. And I know that if it helps with the timing, we could just continue the discussion during lunch. That's fine with me as well. The basic work for which we were awarded the prize, at some level, is extremely simple and maybe in retrospect extremely obvious. I sometimes wonder why we got a prize for this. So there's an approach that's actually been known and is used for quite widely in other fields other than economics, and has really advanced knowledge tremendously. And it's used, one example perhaps where it's been used the most is in medicine, but it's also used by many private technology companies today. So in medicine, it's known as randomized controlled trials. And if somebody's going to propose a new medicine or a new vaccine, the first step is to make sure that it actually works, and also, of course, that it's safe. And so, traditionally, there were all sorts of things that people who are trying to improve health tried, leeches and all sorts of other things. And lifespans were, for many centuries, until very recent, until the 19th century, or in fact the early 20th century, lifespans worldwide were very short and mortality was very high. And then we saw a revolution in health. And there are many individual discoveries that contributed to that, but there was also a change in this. There was a technique of doing randomized trials, because the approach was have some group get treated, have some comparison group, make sure these groups are truly comparable prior to treatment, typically using randomization, and then follow up afterwards and see what the difference is in terms of how their health outcomes are. And this led to this, in part, was one of the factors that led to this huge improvement both in our scientific understanding and to our practical human health and development of drugs. You know, if you think about, this is a very different field, but technology companies are doing similar tests. You know, if you think about Amazon or Microsoft or Google, they're all the time trying to make their products better. And they're trying small changes to their websites to improve their products. They try to see what gets more customer response, what retains customers more. And then, you know, they try this on a small sample of the people viewing their website. They learn what works, and then they for the things that are successful, they try it more broadly. So really, all that Abhijit, Esther, and I did was to try to apply similar techniques to government programs, particularly we've each worked in a number of different countries. I'll give, just to make this concrete, I'll give one example from Colombia. Colombia in the 1990s had a program that provided vouchers for people who wanted to. They had a lot of children in primary school, but they're trying to expand access to secondary school. They provided a lot of vouchers, but they didn't have enough for everybody, so they had a lottery, not for research reasons, but for fairness reasons. There were more applicants than there were money that they had for the vouchers, so they had a lottery. We compared the winners and losers, so it's very much like a randomized trial in medicine. And in that particular case, we saw the winners seem to do better, and they actually wound up probably earning more later in life. And so that's an example of using this technique to evaluate a government program. Turning to the Dominican Republic, the Colombian example was one where this was sort of an accident. They didn't do this for research reasons. They did this to learn about the policy. In particular, they did it for fairness reasons. So some governments are when you talk to a government about trying to do this to evaluate the policies, to learn what's working and what's not, sometimes governments you have different reactions in different cases. I think the ideal reaction would be, yes, we want to learn about what things are working, what things aren't, so we can modify, so we can learn, so we can get better over time. But also, of course, it's possible for people to be defensive and to worry about, is this going to, what if it yields negative results, etc. I would, we had connected. The government of the Dominican Republic had reached out to our team quite a while ago. This was, I think, the initial contacts were from the economic advisor to the president, Pedro Severio, and that initiated a series of discussions, and we followed up with Minister Contreras, and we've had a number of conversations and with Luis Madera, and we've had a number of conversations with Vice Minister Shaker in education, and I think we've been really excited to see the real commitment to learning and to understanding the impact of policies in the government of the Dominican Republic, to try to really learn what's working, what's not working, and how to improve. And just last night had the opportunity and the honor of meeting the president, and was able to share some information on some of the discussions we've had, and that obviously that attitude is coming from the very top. So happy to discuss some of the ideas of particular projects. These are all, these are projects coming from the government of the Dominican Republic they're not ideas coming from us. We're just trying to help with the evaluation of them. I will say one thing you had asked about other lessons about any thoughts on the overall economy of the Dominican Republic or the global economy. I'm unfortunately, I realize this may not be as exciting from a media point of view, but one thing that we've learned over and over again in doing these evaluations is we know much less than we think we know. We're constantly being surprised. So I'm going to be a little bit reluctant I don't know much about the overall economy of the Dominican Republic, so I'm going to be probably, I'm a little bit reluctant to say things about that, but I am happy to talk about, the evaluation agenda. So.
Si me permite,
Adelante.
para complementar las palabras del profesor Kremer. El Estado Dominicano, en quienes somos responsables de promover políticas públicas, estamos obligados a hacerlo bien. El Estado Dominicano está obligado con la ciudadanía dominicana a invertir bien sus recursos y a lograr resultados sociales que todos deseamos al menor costo posible, con el mayor impacto posible, potenciando las sinergias, logrando buenas articulaciones, logrando que las contradicciones entre políticas sean la menor posible. Esa es una responsabilidad, promover esto es una responsabilidad fundamental del Ministerio de Economía, Planificación y Desarrollo. Y esto lo hacemos a través de la planificación. A veces se piensa que la planificación es un libro, que es un plan, pero que al final los gobiernos y las autoridades hacen lo que quieren. Bueno, la idea es ir transformando eso, construyendo un sistema nacional de planificación mucho más robusto, en donde todas las instituciones tomen en serio los planes, los objetivos y los esfuerzos conjuntos que tenemos que hacer para lograr las metas más importantes en cada una de las áreas, en materia de salud, en materia de educación, en materia de infraestructura vial, de medio ambiente, de empleo de calidad, en fin. En ese contexto existe lo que se llama la Comisión Nacional de Seguimiento y Evaluación. Es una comisión creada por decreto hace ya varios años, la cual coordina el Ministerio de Economía. Estamos, digamos, bajo la supervisión del Ministerio de Economía, el Ministerio de la Presidencia, el Ministerio de Economía por razones obvias, ¿no? Es el ministerio responsable de la planificación, pero al mismo tiempo del Ministerio de la Presidencia por precisamente ser la cabeza, digamos, del gobierno, está muy cerca del presidente. El Ministerio de Hacienda porque le importa cómo se inviertan los recursos, y el Ministerio de Administración Pública porque tiene un rol fundamental en todo el tema del funcionamiento del sector público. Entonces, esta comisión nacional, digamos, es responsable de articular un sistema nacional de seguimiento y evaluación. Y esto es una pieza fundamental para hacer buenas políticas públicas. Tenemos que darle seguimiento a lo que hacemos, ver si estamos obteniendo los resultados o no estamos obteniendo los resultados, si estamos produciendo lo que debemos producir para obtener los resultados o no, o en qué medida, si estamos recibiendo los recursos necesarios para lograr eso, si los procesos están adecuadamente articulados, bien conformados. Y esto es un proceso continuo de hacer y revisar, hacer y revisar. Y hemos desarrollado un importante conjunto de capacidades en el Ministerio de Economía y en el Estado en sentido amplio para avanzar en esa dirección. Una de esas tareas, además de tener todos estos, ir construyendo indicadores continuos, tenemos, ¿cuántos indicadores, Luis? Tenemos más de 400 indicadores de seguimiento de políticas públicas en la República Dominicana. O sea que por ahí hemos avanzado bastante, en unas áreas mucho más que en otras. En áreas de bienestar humano es donde hemos avanzado más. Hay temas en todo el mundo, por ejemplo, tenemos desafíos de construir indicadores en materia ambiental, ¿ya? Donde estamos un poco más rezagados, repito, en todo el mundo, y es normal porque la agenda ambiental ahora es la que está teniendo mucho más fuerza en los últimos 10 años, ¿no? Entonces, El seguimiento, digamos, hemos estado haciendo un buen trabajo, pero en materia de evaluación, significa hacer un análisis riguroso, basado en datos, en evidencia. Digamos, hay mucho más por hacer. Evaluar significa analizar con mucho detalle, con mucha rigurosidad, mucha sistematicidad, programas que se consideren absolutamente esenciales, importantes, o programas con los cuales hay suficiente dato, evidencia, información, una base para ser evaluado, que permita realizar el trabajo y que permita ver si se está haciendo bien, si se está haciendo regular, si se está haciendo mal, qué se puede corregir, si hay que descartarlo del todo y hay que repensar el programa. En fin, la evaluación es una herramienta y una actividad fundamental para hacer buena política pública. Hay algo importante que el profesor Kremer, en las pocas horas que tiene en el país, ha estado insistiendo, y es que no se trata de aprobar o quemar a las instituciones y a los programas, se trata de aprender, y eso es muy importante. Yo creo que todas las instituciones públicas, pero también el sector privado, debería estar abierto y entusiasmado de que puedan ser, de que sus programas, sus intervenciones, sus acciones puedan ser evaluadas, porque es la única manera de ir transformando, aprendiendo. Las instituciones exitosas de cualquier naturaleza, el profesor Kremer lo ha dicho en la estadía acá, son aquellas que evalúan continuamente para precisamente innovar. La innovación es, digamos, clave del éxito en lo que sea. Estar, digamos, 2 pasos, 3 pasos adelante, mirando al futuro. ¿Qué podemos proveer nuevo, distinto, que sea relevante, satisfactorio para el objetivo que nos queremos alcanzar? Entonces, en el Ministerio tenemos la misión, el empeño de robustecer en la República Dominicana instituciones para la evaluación y ir creando una cultura de evaluación. Y es por eso que estamos organizando, iniciando esta noche con la conferencia del profesor Kremer en el aula magna de la UAS, el Foro Internacional de Evaluación y Desarrollo. Evaluación y Desarrollo, evaluación para el desarrollo. Evaluación para el desarrollo. Okay. Es un foro que convoca a toda la sociedad, pero especialmente claramente a los especialistas del gobierno, de la sociedad civil, de la academia, para discutir en qué punto estamos en esa materia de evaluación, cuál ha sido nuestra experiencia. La impresión que tenemos es que mucho de la evaluación que se ha hecho en la República Dominicana, una parte importante de la evaluación ha sido, digamos, no ha sido sistemática, no ha sido suficientemente sistemática, aislada en casos específicos, frecuentemente solicitado por organismos internacionales que financian, que proveen apoyo financiero para el despliegue de estos programas y de estas intervenciones. Y queremos superar esa etapa y crear capacidades y además frecuentemente hechas por consultores o organismos no estatales o no nacionales. La idea es crear capacidades nacionales en el Estado, pero también fuera del Estado, y crear una comunidad de evaluación.
Bien.
Muchas gracias.
Marte.
Sí. Yo quiero aprovechar, muchísimas gracias por estar bienvenido a la República Dominicana. Quiero aprovechar para preguntarle a los dos, uno, a usted, profesor, el impacto que puede tener en economía pequeña como República Dominicana un conflicto como el que está aconteciendo en Gaza, en la franja de Gaza, el conflicto ahora de Israel, o el conflicto entre Israel y Gaza, esa orgía de sangre que se está dando, y qué pasaría si ese conflicto se expande, se convierte en un conflicto regional. Y a Pavel Isa, me gustaría preguntarle el impacto que puede tener en la proyección económica que tiene el gobierno, que habla de un 3% de crecimiento para este año, ese conflicto en Dajabón, en la frontera, ese cierre, si se mantiene esa situación, ¿cómo podría eso limitar el crecimiento económico? O si, por el contrario, es la oportunidad para expandir los negocios, otras islas y demás, si es tan fácil como lo pintas.
Yo voy a intervenir primero. Mira, yo quisiera que nos enfocáramos en el tema que que nos convoca aquí, Germán, y me disculpas, no quiero tampoco especular sobre lo que pueda pasar en Medio Oriente, como tú bien señalas, unas dinámicas terriblemente dolorosas, deshumanizantes, pero es difícil ponerse a especular en este momento. Yo quisiera que habláramos un poquito más de evaluación y de políticas públicas en la República Dominicana y los esfuerzos que estamos haciendo por evaluar programas críticos. Estamos trabajando con el Development Innovation Lab, que encabeza el profesor Kremer, pensando en temas como, por ejemplo, el programa de inglés por inmersión. Queremos evaluar ese programa, estamos en esa intención. También queremos evaluar el programa 1424, que lo que procura es insertar en el sistema educativo o en el sistema o en el trabajo a una población joven que ni estudia ni trabaja. Queremos evaluar algunos programas, probablemente estamos sentando las bases para empezar a evaluar programas en el Ministerio varios programas en el Ministerio de Educación. Así que yo creo que me gustaría conducir la conversación, orientarla en esa dirección.
¿De otras instituciones se evaluarían?
Y el profesor Kremer, ¿qué opina de esas empresas?
Yeah, as I said, I'm reluctant to speak about. I think I'd like to focus my remarks on areas where I really have more knowledge, and I'm not a macroeconomist or a specialist in, certainly I'm very far from a specialist in diplomacy, or so I probably can't really remark on that. On that issue, but happy to discuss other issues where I've got more expertise.
Millicent.
I would like to talk about economy, poverty, and women, because the current Nobel Prize was a pretty good work about this, and I want to know what do you think about this, please. And welcome to Dominican Republic.
I think we've learned over the years, we've learned a lot of lessons about approaches to poverty reduction at a very specific, concrete level, for a variety of reasons, including through the experimental approach. So one lesson is that, let me start with something not particularly from the experimental approach, but just something that we've seen at a global level, but Dominican Republic is really a key example of this. At a global level, there had been up until maybe the end of the last century, certainly up through close to the end of the last century, there hadn't been any systematic tendency for convergence in incomes across countries. But during this century, during the 21st century, we've seen strong evidence of convergence in incomes. In other words, we've seen faster growth rates of countries that are not at the very top income level, and there's been catch-up. And a key, and we don't know all the reasons for that, but Dominican Republic has had very high growth rates relative to many other countries. And I'm not an expert on the Dominican Republic, but clearly what I've been told by others is that there's been political stability and democracy. There's been macroeconomic stability, and there's been a growth of various industries over time, and transition across sectors, growth of manufacturing, growth of services, including tourism. A key factor driving the reduction in poverty is economic growth. So let me start with, and obviously a lot of successes, private sector successes. So that's one factor. Now another factor is putting in place good government programs to deliver services like education, like health, like social protection. And this is maybe an area where randomized trials and experiments I think we've learned a number of lessons. Those vary, but one of the, I'll maybe give one lesson from health and one from education. One from health is that if there's some approaches that are about preventive health, and particularly for young children, a lot of overall life expectancy, low life expectancy had been because of high infant mortality and child mortality. So there's some steps that can be done to address that. And I don't know the details of, I see life expectancy for Dominican Republic is now quite good. I don't know the details of all of the policies in the Dominican Republic, but having good preventive health care and good access to basic health care, particularly for at the beginning of life, is one vital step. On education, I think there was clearly an increase in the budget that went to education, and I think one thing that we've learned as we've studied education is that it's also important to accompany any increases in the budget with trying to have the right types of structures of curriculum that will translate those extra resources into extra learning. And that's some of the ways to do that are not necessarily obvious and take some I think we're learning more about that over time. One approach that can be very useful is to have some sort of structured pedagogy for fundamental literacy and numeracy. And my understanding, although I don't know the details, is that this is an important part of what the government is doing. Let me turn to some things that we are hoping to work with, or in fairly advanced planning with on the government in terms of evaluation. So the government has a robotic program in education on robotics. Now, one of the things that many people in education believe is that the best way to learn is to be actively involved in the learning, not just to have the teacher teaching and the student is passively listening, but the student is actually doing something and trying things out and actively learning. Well, robotics, playing with robots, I'm not talking about actual large-scale robots. I'm thinking about educational robots, either designed for different ages. Obviously preschoolers need something different than others, but actually doing things with them and actually learning to program them, that's an initiative of the government. And I think there's theoretical reasons why this might, in fact, be very effective. At the same time, you need to test to see whether it actually works in practice. So the government's, we're in discussions with the government about the possibility of doing an evaluation on that. Another area would be the government's brought in a education program on sexual education and values, and that may be very important. And I think there's evidence from a number of smaller scale studies done elsewhere. I was involved in a study that showed some potentially beneficial effects from this, but the government wants to carefully evaluate its program and to learn, for example, does this reduce teenage pregnancy? Well, if it's possible to reduce teenage pregnancy, it's very important to know that, and if adjustments to the program are needed, that's also important to know. So we hope that we'll be able to support the government in